Metrobank are committed to championing those who make a difference in their cricket community. In a new content series featuring England players, they've surprised 3 grassroots heroes who go above and beyond to drive forward girls' cricket in their area. Check out the second episode featuring Zach Crawley and Izzy from Bletchley Town Cricket Club on Metrobank's Instagram and X channels. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today, back from the Caribbean, is Lauren Winfield-Hill. Later on the show, we'll hear from Katya and Ben on their thoughts on the recent England squads, and we also have an interview with Ireland's Arlene Kelly. Lauren, good to be back in sunny Yorkshire.
Yeah, it's exactly as you'd expect it to be. Drizzle rain at the minute.
The league phase of the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy finished up on Saturday. Your Northern Diamond side finished top of the group, though they were on the wrong side of things on Saturday. Just looking at how the tournament's structured, it looks like a really hard competition to maintain momentum in. You know, it starts right at the beginning of the season. There's a massive break in June, massive break in August, and then the business end is late September.
Yeah, I think it's one of those comps. It's not like, you know, in franchise cricket where you talk a lot about momentum and going into the next game or finals, because they come so thick and fast, whereas it is very different. It's quite stop-start. I think the finals is almost like a separate little event in itself. Just as you said, you've got a little bit of time between. Yeah, so I don't really think the whole momentum thing is quite as key in this sort of competition. I think it is literally just about taking it game by game, and especially, like I say, moving into the finals, it's almost feels like a separate sort of entity, and what's gone before doesn't really stand for anything. You've got a week between, and then you've got a week again if you're successful. So it's funny how it's structured, this finals, because even just talking to like Burnsy R overseas is, she's like, goodness, it's quite chockers throughout the season. Like at times you can play 350 over games in a week, and then you've almost got this like long drawn out time between finals. I do feel like you'd almost be better off doing a midweek and then a weekend. So you got 2 games, a semi midweek and the final on the weekend. But I guess you're trying to get it on a weekend and maybe try and get more people in and a bit more exposure and things like that. So it's always a conundrum.
I was just thinking it's quite rare these days that you get a full week between games in a competition. It's quite rare.
To be honest, I'm not complaining, because it's quite nice to just be able to just have a bit of a decent practice as well, like have a bit of a chill out and switch off for a couple of days, but then have a real good run in. So I think it's depends where you're at and how you're going and what you're doing and where your body's at. But I think, yeah, in some ways it's quite nice to be able to take a little bit of time and get some details right in training.
Obviously, all to play for in the semi-finals and finals, but the Diamonds finished top of the league. What do you put down your success to?
I've got no idea. I mean, we've chosen the wrong year to do it, because there's really no benefit whatsoever to finishing top. We were saying, you know, I reckon they need to start doing it. This is I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but there's got to be something where it's rewarded for finishing top. Like genuinely, we're laughing about it, but it's like the year that we finished top, there's 4 other teams that are at no less disadvantage than us for finishing a good bit in front. So whether it's like like you host the final or whatever it might be, regardless of whether you're going to be there or not, but there is literally nothing that's of any more benefit than finishing 4th. What do we put it down to this year? I think the development of the domestic players. I think actually, you know, players who have done a lot of the heavy lifting in the past, you know, myself included, haven't had the best seasons. But what we have had is we've had lots of really good domestic players step up. Emma Marlowe's come good with the bat. You've got, I think Phoebe Turner for me has been player of the summer in my opinion.
Talk to me about Phoebe Turner, because just looking at the lists yesterday, leading wicket taker in the competition, got some handy runs with the bat as well. And she's not played a single game in the 100, so she's a not necessarily that known a quantity.
No, she's an awesome girl, Phoebe Turner. She's she's very passionate. She's very immersed in cricket. She loves the game. But I think what she's it surprised me because when I first saw Phoebe Turner, I thought she was a batter that bowled. Whereas I mean, and I do think she'll be a genuine all rounder. I think she'll bat at 4 or 5 and bowl sort of as she's bowling now. Um, but she's got a half a yard of pace. She sort of surprises you a little bit with the pace that she's got. She's pretty tall, gets good bounce. But I honestly think what she does is just repeats really good deliveries. You know, she bowls a sort of hits the splice length. She bowls a hard length and nips it around off the seam, which, you know, I think, in my opinion, seam bowling is more difficult to play than swing bowling because, you know, she bowls these big nip backers and then the next one beats the outside edge. But she's got good change ups at the death as well. She hasn't had to do that a lot because actually her best ball's been really effective. But she has got really good skills at the death with Yorkers, with back of the hand slow balls, etc. And I think speaking to her last year to this year, like the biggest change has been, I think psychologically a little bit for her. Like last year was obviously her first year coming up through the academy, a contracted player. I just think she put so much pressure on herself and was almost, yeah, just trying too hard. Whereas this year she looks really settled and comfortable in her role. She knows that she's getting backed in, week out. And yeah, she's bowled well. And if you look at people that she's got out as well, she's got proper batters out. You know, she's not sweeping up tails. But yeah, people like that, the domestic girls have done really well. You know, the Emma Marlows, Stair Callis, you know, even like Rebecca Duckworth last week hasn't played a lot, batted really well. You know, Phoebe Turner, Sophia Turner's had some nice little cameos with the ball. So that's probably been the biggest difference, really, because like I said, I haven't fired this summer. Holly's done pretty well when she's been around, but she hasn't been around all the time. Bess hasn't been around all the time. So that's probably the biggest thing, really.
Do you know how availability will be like for the knockouts? Obviously, Bess and Holly away with England at the moment.
I think my understanding is that they're not available for the semis, but I feel like at least Holly's the non-England contracted players are available for finals, is my understanding. I don't know that as gospel. Bess is different because England have control over her, whereas obviously you'd like to think that, you know, Holly would instantly become available because essentially she's a Northern Diamonds player.
Elsewhere in the final round of games, we talked briefly last week about Kirsty Gordon choosing not to go to the Ireland series, wanting to focus on the Blazes campaign. The Blaze in the end actually didn't qualify for the knockouts. They lost to the Sparks. They only got 166, and that was chased down relatively easily. I guess quite an interesting week for Gordon because there was some speculation that she might return to the Scotland ranks, but actually that was not that was. And there was some speculation that the reason why she wasn't going to the Ireland series is because she'd been in Scotland's World Cup squad, but actually she is staying with England for the moment. She said she's very happy with where she is at the moment. But yeah, it's a shame because the Blaze are now knocked out, and that's only one England game done. So actually, she could have played quite a lot. I guess it's not too late to fly her out there if that's what they want.
Yeah, no, I wonder if she'll be on Skyscanner looking at flights now. It is an interesting one, you know. Like I had fair play to her initially with the decision because I think, you know, sometimes I think especially over here in men's and women's game, the domestic game can be seen as people don't really care about it. To be honest, you know, you look at use this series as an example, is that you've got none of your best players are going to be playing in finals. So, you know, things like that is that the value of domestic cricket is not always cherished. And the same in the, you know, there's a lot of talks about the men's game with the county system. And I thought, you know what, fair play to Kirsty Gordon saying, you know, this means a lot to me. This is the biggest deal that I've got going on in my cricketing career right now, and I'm captain, and I want to be there and play for my team. And I thought that was a pretty brave decision, but I was, fair play. Like a lot of people just are yes people, aren't they? They just do as they're told and go where they're told. But I thought it was pretty brave. It'll be interesting to see, like I say, how it all plays out from here on in, whether opportunities will now be limited with that decision, at England level, whether actually it's fair play, you're still going to be involved, or yeah, it's a really interesting one. Obviously she's not in the squads for there, so I'd be very surprised if she was on the next flight to Belfast. But it's you feel for her a bit, to be honest, because I think she's trying to do the right thing. She's a leader in that group. She wants to play finals cricket, which is what everybody wants to do as a player. But it's sort of backfired a bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's worth saying, as you say, just because it didn't work out for them doesn't make it the wrong decision. Like, had they won that game and they go through and she's part of something really special at the Blaze, we would probably be saying, oh, what an amazing decision that was. So, yeah, I'd really respect that, there's someone out there who's prominent in the domestic game saying that actually, this is my focus for the moment. On that England-Ireland series, that started on Saturday. England won the first game. Kate Cross, the captain, had one hell of a game as skipper, taking a sixfer with the ball and scoring a crucial 30 odd with the bat. I wanted to start on Ireland because I feel like sometimes people look at a team like Ireland and just assume England are going to roll them over easily. But actually, Ireland put in some really, really strong performances in that game. Amy Hunter and Orla Prendergast looked extremely good with the bat. Hunter took down Cross a couple of times down the ground. She's only 18. I think she scored an ODI 100 when she was 16. And Prendergast scored 70 odd and took 2 early wickets with the ball. You'd have paid quite a lot against Prendergast. She's a really outstanding talent.
Yeah, she's an awesome player. I think she's a genuine all-rounder as well. She threats with bat and ball. Yeah, no, she's a great athlete. She's good in the field. I think people were surprised that she got picked up in the Big Bash just because she's not a headline name. But I think that's, if you look at her going to the Adelaide Strikers, that's no surprise because Luke's at the Adelaide Strikers. He's not a tag man. He's who can do the job we want. We need you to do. He's not a headlines and glittery name sort of guy. There was no surprises really if you've seen her play and know what she offers that she got picked up. Like I say, she can bowl in all phases of the game, and she's decent with the bat. And she's still pretty young, and I think she's going to get better and better. You look at somebody like an Irish player like Kim Garth, who went over to Australia and got exposed in those sorts of comps, and just went from strength to strength. And I think it's really good that like you see somebody like Orla getting picked up and drafted in those competitions, because I guess the challenge now, I was speaking to a couple of the Scottish girls actually about this the other day, with the girls still being able to play domestic cricket and not count as overseas, whereas obviously for Ireland now, those girls count as overseas. So getting exposure to those sorts of competitions is so important for their development as well. Obviously, they're going to be playing they're going to get regular international series and fixtures. But outside of that, you probably need to explore other opportunities to develop and get better. So I think the fact that Ola's getting that exposure, and it sort of only takes one comp, doesn't it, before you're sort of in and amongst it. And I just think that we'll just see her get better and better. I think Ireland, they do rely a little bit on a few batters. We've seen with Gabby Lewis, Amy Hunter's come good. She's had a good series previous to this as well. Orla Prendergast. I think it's one of those things where you sort of give them a year or two and more people contributing, and there'll be a real strength. But yeah, it was a decent first game, to be fair. It wasn't rolled over by either team, and there was what was it, 7 down or something chasing?
6 down, but Heath and Cross put on 50 or 60 odd to get England over the line. So England was scoring at a really good run rate, but actually wickets were something they had to consider towards the end of that game. I guess also looking at the game, it's quite interesting because obviously that's not England's first choice team, but the manner in which they went about things with the bat in particular, it was quite a seamless transition from the first choice team to the team out there in Ireland. Holly Armitage, Paige Schofield, Freya Kemp, Bess Heath, and Kate Cross actually all scored at a very good rate. Freya Kemp striking 136. Kemp is one of the few players who's involved in the T20 World Cup squad who's also on the Ireland tour. Looking ahead to the World Cup, right now, what does she give that's most important for England? Is it more as a batter or a bowler at this point?
Well, that's a big money question. I think if you look at performances at the minute as a bowler, I think she's in as a bowler at the minute. We probably haven't seen the best of her with the bat yet. She played really nicely at Canterbury against New Zealand, sort of finished the game and played that role really nicely. But I think that's probably more of a role of a bowler and a bit of a finisher. I think when we've seen her be more exposed as a batter, getting a slightly higher up the order, she's struggled a little bit more. And that's not to say she can't do it. That's just pure fact of numbers at the minute across the 100 in the last little bit has not been great with the bat. But we all know the capabilities she has with the bat. And obviously the option of a left-hander through the middle is hugely beneficial, especially as you go back end and you think, you sort of bowlers are trying to execute plans at the death and you've got left and right. I think that's a really good situation to be in with as an England team. But I would say probably at the minute, just based on her sort of form with the bat, she probably offers a bit more with the ball. And in that sort of like 7-8 finishing role, she's perfect because she's a genuine all-rounder. But I think at the minute, when she gets a little bit higher than that, as we sort of saw in the 100, she's struggled a little bit more. The thing is as well, if you're bowling and it takes a bit of pressure off your batting as well. If you're sort of seen as a bit of a bowler and you come in and your batting's almost like a luxury, I think that'll be the way that she sort of turns into a genuine all-rounder. So a few cameos here and there in the finishing role and get confidence from that. Because there's no doubt that she'll end up being the Ben Stokes, and that's Siva Brunt. I think so. I just think at the minute she hasn't quite, I guess, just found that method in making larger contributions, isn't it? But she's such an asset. She offers everything, and like there's absolutely no doubt that she would have been in that squad because of that. Even though her form wasn't great running in, she'd still be one of the names that I'd be putting on that squad list because she can replace an opening bowler if they rested or they go down. She could easily play as a batter and a gun fielder if that was what's required. So she's a great package. And we just probably haven't seen quite the best of it yet. But everyone forgets as well how young she is. And I think you get thrust into international cricket, having not had a load of a backlog of domestic cricket to sort of fall back on. It's sort of a bit sink or swim, isn't it? And you're trying to learn on the job on the biggest stage. So I think, the best is definitely yet to come. But she's just such a great package for England. She just gives so much balance to that squad.
Yeah, I mean, she is so young. She only turned 19 this summer and has spent a lot of time out with injury, etc. So yeah, still incredibly young. The final thing I wanted to ask you was, it's obviously a couple of weeks now since the World Cup got announced that it's moving from Bangladesh to the UAE. And initially, a lot of the chat was, that there's so little high-level women's cricket that's been played there. So it's very difficult to look at numbers in the same way that even in Bangladesh, even though that England hadn't played in Bangladesh for a long time, there had been some high-level cricket played there that you could sort of look at patterns, etc., etc. But the one thing I guess that we know from T20 cricket that's played in that part of the world is that dew plays a massive factor in games. Obviously, it's not straightforward comparing men's World Cups to women's World Cups, but there was a men's T20 World Cup played at exactly the same time of year with games starting at exactly the same time a few years ago. And the chat then was you win the toss, you win the game because dew had such a big impact in the second half of a game. What are the challenges that conditions that have a lot of dew give teams? Do you try to balance your side differently? Or do you go about the 40 overs any differently when you know there's a threat of dew later in a game?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually, and it's something that probably the experience that I've just had at CPL plays. It played a massive role there as well. In terms of the toss was hugely important. I think the other part that becomes really important as well is that, there's a lot of talk of it being all out spin and a lot of spin used, but actually when there's a lot of dew, it's so difficult for spinners to grip the ball. Because it's literally like a bar of soap. So I think that plays into it a little bit as well. Is it does become incredibly difficult for spinners to, especially finger spinners, with the wet ball under dew. And the other thing is, I reckon a little bit psychologically with things like that, where it becomes a bit of a subconscious thing about the toss. Whereby, if the coin lands the wrong side and you're doing what you don't really desirably want to do at the toss, it does become like a little bit of a psychological advantage to the team that's come on the right side of the toss, I think. And I guess it's one of those things where the more evidence you get, the more it becomes a big deal as well. Where it's sort of, we had it's obviously a baby version of it, but in the CPL it seemed to be the same thing, where you sort of, if you ended up batting first or whatever, it became considerably difficult doing it this way around. And then the more evidence, the more games went, and it became more obvious that was a benefit. I think sometimes the psychological impact of that has a bearing, because it's something that you can't control, but equally, has a huge impact on the game.
Yeah. I mean, just to explain to listeners, because unless you're a professional, you've never played a day-night game. How wet does the ball get in those conditions?
Yeah, really. A lot of the bowlers actually always say, "Loz, you don't understand. Like, this is," because they'll be struggling. So what you see is, a lot of the time you'll get more full tosses, or the opposite. You'll get drag downs because players are scared to let go of it. Use spinners for example. Is it just slips out your hand earlier? So where your delivery point will be, say, when your arm's at the top, it just slips out a lot earlier, and then you get full tosses and things like that. And you're trying your hardest. Everybody's got rags on to try and dry the ball. But ultimately, as soon as it goes across the floor, it's just absolutely saturated again, and it just sits in the seam, and it becomes like a bar of soap. I mean, the other thing is getting balls changed in those conditions. Again, just pure experience at the CPL, and times when there was every game the ball had to be changed, and sometimes twice in a game, because the ball was just destroyed and saturated. So it can almost take finger spinners out of the game, to be perfectly honest, because you'll get, if you bowl a couple of full tosses, you'll be off for dangerous bowling. I guess the other massive impact is in the field. It's very difficult to field catches. Catches under lights are difficult at the best of times, with dew adds another factor. Even just throws in from the boundary, is people can't grip it to throw it. You get more twos. Again, it's difficult. You get more fumbles because the balls just come off the surface different. So there is, when you sort of start to unravel it, there is a lot of different factors that it does really change quite a lot. But I think, like you say, it's the actual skill element becomes difficult, fielding and bowling under lights. The psychological element that, if the first 4 games all play out with the toss being important, and that becomes like a huge variable, it then becomes a little bit of a talking point and a thing amongst teams.
No, it must be so important for teams not to let their shoulders drop too much, because normally you lose a toss, you crack on.
Yeah.
But in these situations, you've got to make sure that doesn't affect you too much. Anyway, it's not too long to go until the World Cup. Actually, less than a month. October the 3rd, it all kicks off in the UAE. That's everything from us. Next up, Katya and Ben will react to some news around next year's domestic structure and the England World Cup squad, as well as Katya's chat with Ireland's Arlene Kelly. In the last couple of weeks, the location for the World Cup has changed, and England have announced a World Cup squad for that new location, that is the UAE. What did you make of the World Cup squad?
The squad itself, firstly, I think this is such a tricky one to pick. I mean, it was already hard to pick when it was in Bangladesh because England hadn't played there before, and you're having to pick, a team based on, a lot of data, a lot of what you're seeing, but also knowing that you kind of have to pass between who are your best players and that kind of thing. That's even harder when it gets to the UAE because there's even less kind of women's cricket data and, stuff we've seen in general there. So that's the kind of the mitigation for everything and why I can understand the squad they picked. But I think with that being the case, I think I'm slightly surprised it's as tilted towards the spinners as it is, rather than a squad that allows you to cover all sorts of bases, because there's that more element of the unknown. Like you might get and I think it is fair to do comparisons to men's cricket here a bit more, just because there is so much less to go on. Like firstly, in men's cricket, white ball cricket in the UAE and Bangladesh is quite far apart. I mean, it's you don't get as much seam movement and this pitch is a bit slower in the UAE, that's true. But Bangladesh cricket is like extreme, where spin is so dominant, and the Bangladesh men's team are very, very good at home and don't have as much of an impact in global tournaments outside of there. Whereas in the UAE, it's like it's a bit more kind of normal, I guess. And so that's why I wonder. I guess it's Lauren Filer in particular. I think I would have liked to see in there, because you can see on those slower pitches that is where that extra pace can make the difference. But I think that's more but then they think that spin is just going to be the way to go, and I can sort of get that. It's a gamble, but if it pays off and if the pitches are slow and there's just no help for pace bowls at all, and all you need is those 2 overs of swing from Lauren Bell and a bit of fill-in from the all-rounders, then that's kind of fine, and that might well pay off. The aspect of it that I think I'm a bit more skeptical about is this often the identity of the backup keeper isn't always the thing that decides tournament or not. So that this just might not matter at all, because Amy Jones probably will just not get injured and be fine throughout the whole thing. But I think if she were to get injured, I would want either coming in the second best wicketkeeper bat in the country, which would be Tammy Beaumont. And I know Lauren was saying last week that Bess Heath, who is in the squad, she fulfills a similar role in domestic cricket to what Amy Jones does in the England side. But I just think that if it's if Amy Jones cracks a thumb or pulls a hamstring on the morning of a semi-final and it's England v Australia or India, who do I think is more likely to be able to score boundaries against the best bowlers in the world at the end of an innings right now? I think that is Tammy Beaumont, basically. And so that's one thing. But then the other thing as well, actually, I think the other way they could have gone, Bess Heath is not an outstanding keeper at that level. And actually, if they think spin is going to play such a big part, and you're also going to want it the pitch a bit slow, you want to be standing up to the seamer, and they also have all these all-rounders, Danny Gibson, Nats of Brunt, even, Eccleston and Charlie Dean can hold a bat. Actually, you could have even picked someone like Rihanna Southby, and if Amy Jones goes injured, you rejig it a bit, you stick her at, at 9, and you think, right, you just take every chance that comes your way, and that's what we're actually going to miss the most from Amy Jones being there.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. If England are trying to find a like-for-like replacement for Jones, Jones is such a good keeper, actually, prioritising the backup keeper's keeping ability wouldn't have been a ridiculous shout. Katya, how do you see the squad more broadly?
I think it's interesting. I think the aspect that they've only picked Lauren Bell as a specialist seamer is the most interesting part of it. We've talked about this quite a lot. I think we come at it from slightly different points of view. If you've got 3 outstanding spinners in Eccleston, Dean and Glenn, I don't really see the need for a 4th in Lindsay Smith. They probably will play all 4 at some point in the tournament, if not as a starting 11 in the tournament. And Lindsay Smith has been amazing this year. But in the UAE, with everything, you want your 3 best spinners and potentially a bit of variety in there with the seamers. And if, as we said, if Amy Jones cracks a thumb, then Bess Heath is your only option to replace her. If Lauren Bell cracks a thumb, you don't have a seam option to replace her.
Well, you think one of these seam bowling all-rounders will be on the bench? So one of Gibson and Kemp.
One of Freya Kemp or Danny Gibson will be on the bench, but you don't have a specialist who bowls in the same way that Lauren Bell does. No one gets that kind of prodigious swing, and Lauren Filer's point of difference is that she's quicker than everyone else. And you think in the UAE, who's the most likely to get something out of one of those pitches? Probably Lauren Filer. In a round table that Heather Knight did last week, she talked quite a lot about Lauren Filer and said that she thought that Lauren Filer was very unlucky to miss out on that World Cup squad. And John Lewis said that he wanted to see Lauren Filer generate more of that swing that Lauren Bell does. So that's potentially why she's missed out. But it kind of limits the way they can balance their side. The only way they can balance their side is spin heavy. They could bowl with Alice Capsey potentially head the night. They could bowl 20 full overs of spin during the tournament. So they have no other way to balance their squad. They've really put a lot on these spinners paying off, which they could do. We saw in the qualifier, Sri Lanka's spinners basically cleaned up for them in that qualifier. And then if you look at what Scotland in that qualifier, their seamers cleaned up for them. But this kind of gamble has to pay off that they've gone so heavy on spin.
So I don't think it is that much of a gamble. I mean, first of all, England's squad composition is pretty similar to India and Australia's. It's also England, wherever they play 3 spinners in their best 11. And this is giving them cover to do what their plan A is. I think they couldn't pick only 3 spinners without any spin backup. You have to have backup for every squad position. And I agree with what you're saying in terms of there is not a like-for-like replacement for Lauren Bell. But I do think part of it is also how good Lindy Smith has been. It's you're not just having a backup spinner. It's you're having someone, if Eccleston goes down on the morning of a game, you have a really high quality backup option. What I'd almost be more open to, given how much all-round skill England have, is if England only picked one of Gibson and Kemp and had a specialist seamer to replace one of them. I think that will give them more flexibility. I think you need a 4th spinner if you're picking 3 spinners every game.
And also because actually the gamble as well is that there's actually they might want to bowl that 16 overs of spin. Like you do get, especially in T20 cricket, you do get it where, like, you know, the sort of the average on economy rate in a game, or, you know, the expected rate would be like about 8 for quicks and like 6 or less for spinners. And if that happens, then actually, you know, chucking in another spinner is just the best way to go, because sometimes that is just the hardest thing to hit on the day.
Especially in a World Cup where you're only playing on 2 pitches.
Yes. Yeah. So it might be that this isn't the best the squad for the first game of the tournament, but it is the best squad for the last game of the tournament when you want to have 4 spinners. Maybe you have, chuck it to Bell for 2 overs up top, and then actually the other 18, you want to chuck it down slowly.
You made a point about how you don't really want to use men's cricket as using what's happened in men's games as evidence for what might happen in women's cricket. It is different for this World Cup because there has basically been no high-level women's international cricket played in the UAE. If you were looking at a men's tournament as an equivalent, it would be the 2021 Men T20 World Cup. What happened there that will be interesting for this one?
Well, I don't want to totally diminish Australia's triumph in that event.
Go on.
But win the toss, win the game. So hopefully Heather Knight's...
But if people don't remember that tournament, that is the most that has been true of any cricket tournament in living memory.
Yeah. And you had...
And do you want to explain why?
Yeah, it was the dew factor in particular, and the fact that, bowling got harder and harder as games went on, and especially at the death in both semi-finals, and then also kind of in the final to a lesser extent. You had teams that were ahead in the game that batted first, and then that being like undone in basically an instant because of extreme things happening at the death. Now that there was some exceptional skill that went on there, and maybe the bowlers will look and think that they could have done it better, but I think the conditions played a part.
It basically becomes very difficult to grip the ball for both spinners and seamers, which is suboptimal.
Yes, yeah. So hopefully, Knight's there sitting, just flicking a coin up to herself, or practicing her clairvoyance, because that could be quite important, I think.
Well, I think the more interesting thing is not necessarily from how you pick your squad for dew conditions. It's actually just the experience the bowlers have of it. You are asking them to perform in high pressure environments in a World Cup semi-final, potentially, especially if you get through your group easily, you might not feel that much pressure, and suddenly you're plopped into a World Cup semi-final and you're supposed to perform your skills when there's so much pressure on in an environment and in conditions that you're not used to at all.
Yeah, well, when we were talking about the World Cup being in Bangladesh, there was quite a thing about no one really has experience playing in Bangladesh. The last time England had played in Bangladesh was the 2013 T20 World Cup. England have never played a senior international women's game in the UAE, and they've got players like Lauren Bell, who is amazing, but still incredibly early in her career. Yes, Charlie Dean, Sarah Glenn, Sophie Eccleston, amazing bowlers, but they've never played in conditions like this, and even that is going to be alien to them. And they've got this training camp in the UAE, which now looks like a smart move, given that the tournament's been moved to the UAE, but that's going to be quite an important training camp, you want to say, for them to get used to what the conditions are going to be like in the UAE. You've also got the crowd factors. We're not expecting there to be any real crowds there, whereas Knight was pointing out last week that in 2013 in Bangladesh, for a lot of the games, there was actually quite decent crowds. And England now are used to playing in England and Australia and in India, where you do get very, very good crowds to games. They're going to be playing to basically no one. And that's another thing to get used to as well. So it's going to be pretty unfamiliar conditions for everyone.
By the time this podcast is out, the first England-Ireland ODI would have happened. We talked about the England squad for that series on last week's pod. Lots of new faces. Ben, if you had to pick out one, actually not just new face, but face in the squad from an England point of view that's interesting, who do you go for?
Yeah, so I've gone for Bryony Smith, if only because it's so long ago that she kind of broke through into kind of the public consciousness, I guess, back in the I think the first season of the Kia Super League, when she was one of those uncapped batters who looked like she could hit the best bowlers in the world kind of on the front foot, like to the fence basically, which is a rare thing to be able to do when you're stepping up to that level. And I kind of think she still has that ability. It just hasn't she just hasn't tied it together with any sort of regularity. So this season in women's T20 cricket, she's played 19 times, passed 50 once. I think last year was the only time she's passed 50 more than once in a calendar year. She's constantly kind of averaging kind of in the teens. But I still kind of think there's a player there. And so I'm glad, she played a couple games, I think, in 2022 in ODIs. She played a couple of T20s in 2022. And I'm kind of glad that they've got her back involved, because that can be what helps it click, I guess, because I do think that there is such talent in there, and having her, in the setup, hopefully can be the thing that unlocks it, I guess.
Yeah, I think for me, if I was to pick a new or returning face who I think will be in the England team and squad soonest, I think I'd go Rana McDonald-Gay. I mean, that's a bit of a cheat because he's already been in his squad, but you're describing like if England want a Bell substitute almost, I think she's the closest to that in terms of what her skill set is. Obviously a very different type of bowler to Lauren Filer, but she's quite accurate, nips the ball about, bowls quick enough. But in terms of an interesting returning face thing is Maddie Villiers. Maddie Villiers only just turned 26. She last played for England. She made a lot for England, but she last played for England at 23. And actually, if you look at her season by season numbers in the 100, she didn't actually bowl that much in 22 and 23. And this year she bowled a little bit more, slightly more prominently used at the Invincibles. Still only 26, so maybe there's a way back. But I guess her problem has been Charlie Dean's younger and really, really good. So I guess I was slightly surprised they went back there, just because there's not an obvious path to getting back into the England team necessarily. But it'll be interesting to see what she does in an England shirt again.
Yeah, like you said, I think the spinners are looking at this Ireland squad. It's really difficult to judge the spinners because they are never really going to be able to find a way. It's not just that England's three spinners are really good. They're all very different.
Yeah,
they all play very different roles and bowl in very different ways. So it's not like you're just trying to displace one of them. You're trying to displace probably a very specific one of them. And I think the seam bowling attack is probably the most interesting aspect of it, because you said Rhiannon McDonald-Gay, who was called up to England squad earlier in the summer as cover for fast bowlers. You've also got Izzy Wong back in an England squad for the first time since the Sri Lanka kind of horror spell she had last year. And you've got Mahika Gore, who's spent the most of this year completing her A-levels, plus Lauren Filer. So that's going to be a really interesting development to watch, because these group of fast bowlers that England have talked about quite a lot haven't quite come to fruition yet as part of the senior setup. So this Ireland tour could be quite a big moment for all of them, and to determine that kind of pecking order for the next 6 months to a year. But we had her on the podcast last week, and I think it's going to be really interesting to watch Paige Schofield on this England on the Ireland tour. Spoken about her a lot, but she moved from Southern Vipers to South East Stars at the end of 2022, which was interesting considering 2022 was pretty much the height of the Vipers' powers as a domestic side. And the change in Schofield from not really performing massively, well, she was doing okay at the Vipers, but not really setting the world alight, and instantly at South East Stars, she started scoring so many runs, scored her first List A 100 in pretty much the opening match of the season, scored another one later in the season, finished the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy as the leading run scorer, did really well in the Charlotte Edwards Cup. She wasn't getting many games in the 100 when she was at Southern Brave, switched to Oval Invincibles, got more games in 2023. And then this year she opened the batting with Lauren, scored that amazing 70 odd in the first game off 40 balls. And has had really kind of a breakthrough year. It's also coincided with a back injury that we talked about a bit last week that stopped her bowling quite as much, and has really pushed her up the order with her batting, and she's the one who's been banging down the door as someone who hasn't really been in contention before and really should be in contention now. And as the type of player that England want, John Lewis has been very open that he wants players who are going to go out and take the game on and score a lot of runs very quickly, and she's that kind of player. She's not going to hang about, but she's also interesting in that she's batted all the way up and down the order in domestic cricket. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with her, because I don't think there's necessarily a clear choice for how that batting order is going to play out on the Ireland series.
Yeah, I think she's the most... there's a reason why we talked about her a lot in the podcast this year. I think she's clearly the best player that's not in the England team. There are very, very few, not just this season, the 100, but if you go through all 4 years of it, if you look at the leading run scorers, they're all international players. It's really, really rare for someone who's not yet played international cricket to... basically show they can score quickly and heavily against the best bowlers. It's a very high quality competition, and Schofield does that. And not just in the 100, does it in the other two domestic competitions as well. I think there's a really, really high chance that she just barges through the door and basically scores a volume of runs that makes England's... It makes England have a difficult decision down the line, but actually makes it quite easy in terms of she's got to play more and more for England.
She's in for a confusing time, right? Because you said last week that when she was called up, there's obviously the two John Lewises, which has been confusing for everyone, but especially for her. When she got a call up, she saw the name John Lewis pop up on the phone and thought it was the John Lewis who's not the England full-time head coach, and so but who she knows quite well as well. So it was like, all right, how's it going? And then it turns out it's actually someone she should, be a bit less casual with, maybe. But then now, leading England on this tour is going to be John Lewis, not full-time England men's head coach, but John Lewis has been in charge of the A team. She's going to turn up and think like, am I definitely in the right place? I thought I spoke to the other one, but now you're here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it's the great headline when John Lewis got the England job. The Telegraph headline was John Lewis beats John Lewis to England coaching job. From an Ireland point of view, we had Nathan Johns on the show a couple of weeks ago to talk about where they're at. Gabby Lewis will captain the side in the absence of Laura Delaney. Nathan's view was essentially that they're actually going pretty well at the moment, and that their non-qualification for the World Cup was an aberration and something that could always happen with a World Cup qualified tournament that is in that format. Essentially, it comes down to one game, and if you have a top order collapse, which happens in cricket, you are out of a World Cup. He genuinely thought Ireland were doing okay at the moment. Katya, you spoke to Arlene Kelly. What was that conversation like?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, she's interesting on her own. She's got a very interesting path in coming to cricket. Born, raised in New Zealand with an Irish mother. In her late 20s, came over to Ireland for a summer and was going to hang up her playing boots after that. What was essentially a holiday while she played some domestic cricket. And then 9 Ireland players were injured for a series they're about to play, and Ed Joyce picked Arlene Kelly. Yeah. And she's basically played every match for them since then, played in the T20 World Cup last year. In terms of where Ireland are at, I'm kind of inclined to agree with Nathan that non-qualification for the T20 World Cup was a bit of an anomaly. If you look back to where they were at this time, or 18 months ago, they were playing in the 2023 T20 World Cup. They beat Australia in the warm-ups for that competition, which, yes, Australia probably weren't playing their full strength side and it was a warm-up, but they still did it. And then they played in that competition. They had kind of a middling year and then had that awful time at the T20 World Cup qualifier this year. It's also kind of, Scotland are also really good, who out-qualified from that competition, especially in T20. So it's not really... I wouldn't say it's that much of a kind of massive coup for Scotland to beat them, as much as it is for Scotland.
Scotland have got a lot better very quickly as well.
Exactly. And also Ireland have just beaten Sri Lanka in an ODI series for the first time ever. They had some really good performance in that series. Gabby Lewis is really, really good. They've got Orla Prendergast coming through, who's on the brink of kind of picking up franchise gigs, has played as an overseas player in the England domestic tournaments this year. And I think Ireland generally are in a good place and could really give England, or the squad that England have picked, a really good run for their money in this series, if not pick up a couple of wins, if not sneak a series win as well. So I don't think we should be discounting Ireland because they're almost an unknown from an English perspective, if that makes sense. I don't think a lot of people who follow women's cricket in England follow Irish cricket that closely, but Ireland are actually pretty good at the minute. And if you think that in that Sri Lanka series as well, they had a couple of centuries that weren't scored by Chamari Aspatu and they still lost. It's actually really impressive to think what Ireland have been able to do at the minute despite that non-qualification.
Well, here is Katya's chat with Kelly.
Arlene, great to have you on the show. At the time of recording, we're 2 days out from the first ODI between Ireland and England. It's quite a quick turnaround for you guys after the series against Sri Lanka. How's the preparation been in between the two series?
Yeah, it has been a bit of a quick turnaround. I guess we had a couple of days off there to recover, relax, and then we've switched back on a couple of training sessions and heading into camp this afternoon. So looking forward to getting back into the environment and the England series that lies ahead.
It must have been quite a high after the ODI series win against Sri Lanka.
Yeah, that was extremely special, and I guess gives us a lot of belief and confidence heading into this upcoming series. There still are definitely aspects of the game that we'd like to improve and build upon, and we've reflected on those, and we'll hopefully be able to come out and perform even better in this upcoming series.
What were those aspects of the game you'd like to improve on after the Sri Lanka series?
I think we saw the importance of partnerships, particularly in those first 2 one-dayers when we were able to build partnerships. We had runs on the board, whereas particularly in that last game, not so much. And just the importance of being clear on our plans as a bowling unit and then being able to execute that more often than not.
You've spoken before about wanting Ireland to be more clinical in closing out series wins and match wins. Is that something that you think has been worked on and been able to achieve against Sri Lanka?
I think in aspects, I think there's always going to be work that needs to be done. Cricket's a funny game. You can be a hero one day and it'll keep you grounded the next. But I do think playing against some of the best sides in the world, that's the sort of position that we want to be in. And those are the situations where we want to be testing ourselves. So I think, the more experience we have in those match-winning situations and the more regularly we're able to close them out, then I think that can only be a good thing.
Do you like the tag of underdogs? Because I guess when you play these teams like Sri Lanka, you're always going to go in as underdogs. Do you find that frustrating, or do you like that you're not expected to win it?
Look, I'll be honest, personally, I probably wouldn't read too much into those labels. I think for me, every game is just another scenario, and it's about how can I get the best out of myself and how can the team get the best out of ourselves in those situations. So I think obviously the noise is there, but for me personally, it's not something that I'd look into.
And is it difficult to come into a series against a side that you don't play against quite a lot? I mean, you haven't played against Sri Lanka since the T20 World Cup in early 2023.
Yeah, I think it has its challenges, definitely. I think in today's day and age, with the amount of video footage and analysis that you can do in leading up to a series and in replicating as close as you can those conditions in training, I think that definitely is a huge positive. But I also think that's the excitement of cricket, and your ability to adapt on the spot is one of the reasons why I love it.
And if we look back to the start of last year in that T20 World Cup where Ireland beat Australia in the warm-ups, and since then there's been series wins against Scotland and Thailand and Zimbabwe, but also the disappointment of not making the T20 World Cup. How disappointing is it not to be heading out to the UAE later this month? Yeah,
it is disappointing, and obviously we've taken time to reflect on that qualifying campaign. Obviously we'd love to be at that World Cup competing against some of the world's best on a global stage, but only 2 teams can qualify from that competition. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be us. But we'll definitely look forward, see what we can do better next time, and hopefully put that into play.
Is it frustrating because apart from Scotland, you've only played Sri Lanka of the teams who are going out to the T20 World Cup since the last T20 World Cup? Would it have been better to have been able to play nations who do go to that T20 World Cup in between the qualifiers?
Oh, look, I think you always want to be playing as much cricket as possible. I think it's above my pay grade to be organising fixtures and stuff like that. But I do think our preparation leading into the qualifiers was brilliant. We all felt prepared. It's just one of those games, I guess, that particular one against Scotland where nothing happens.
And with Scotland as well, I was thinking about it, and Scottish players are obviously allowed to play in the English domestic leagues as home-born players, and that's not something that's extended to Irish players. Is that something that would be, in your opinion, helpful to Irish players to be able to play more in the English domestic format, which is a bit more developed than the Irish domestic cricket format?
I do think there would be a lot of positives. Again, like I touched on earlier, we want to be playing against some world-class players, and I think there's a lot of competitions out there nowadays where there's competition for spots. So I do think, I know it's a challenging situation, and the lines, I'm not entirely sure what the requirements are, but I do think the more cricket we can play at a higher level, the better that's going to be for the team as a whole. And it's fantastic. The likes of Orla playing in the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy, I think that can only reap good things. And I guess she's doing a fantastic job in getting the Irish name out there. So hopefully we can see more of that in years to come.
And for those who don't know, could you explain what the Irish domestic setup is for women's cricket at the minute?
We've got a 3-team Super Series competition where we play a combination of T20 matches and one-day matches across a period of 2 months up and down the country.
And is that, so how much of the summer does that take up?
It takes up the majority of weekends during the summer, yeah, and then a couple of weekday games in and around university commitments, because obviously it's quite a young group of girls playing cricket over here, so there are other factors that need to be taken into consideration.
And then for yourself, you spend a lot of your winters in New Zealand, which was where you were born and where you grew up. What have you noticed of the difference between the good and the bad between the Irish domestic setup and the New Zealand domestic setup?
I think one of the challenges for Irish cricket is the awareness. Hopefully we will see that grow, for example, with these 2 T20s being broadcast free to air. Hopefully young girls and boys see that they can make a career out of cricket. Naturally, it's up against Gaelic football, camogie, hurling, which is an amazing sport, and they have an amazing community. But I do think hopefully over the next couple of years we'll see a bit more depth, which will then allow better performances at the higher level and feed on through.
And speaking about New Zealand, you came to international cricket slightly later in life, and you grew up in New Zealand. Could you talk me through how you ended up playing for Ireland?
I guess it's a bit of the story that as soon as you stop almost focusing completely on a goal, it almost takes care of itself, because I came over here having done, I think, 9 or 10 seasons of domestic cricket. And I came over here to travel, to see family, to play a season of club cricket and then hang the boots up ultimately. But I was fortunate with a player getting injured and some performances in the Super Series competition that there was the opportunity to play international cricket for Ireland. And playing international cricket is something I dreamed about since I was a little girl, so it was almost too good of an opportunity to turn down.
And you said you dreamed about it. Did you always dream about playing for Ireland, or were you first thinking about representing New Zealand?
No, I guess, to be completely honest, having grown up in New Zealand, listening to the White Ferns play on the radio, that was always a dream. But in saying that, I do have very strong connections to Ireland. Mum's family are over here, and I think it's an honour to pull on the jersey every time.
And what was it like putting on that jersey for the first time a couple of years ago, over to Ireland, thinking you know might hang up your boots after the summer? Yeah,
it was really special. It was pretty surreal. I had cousins in the crowd, so it was nice to have that family connection there. And I guess, yeah, it's something that I take pride in from every game since.
And you've been in the side now for over 50 international matches. Is that something that you could ever have dreamed of 2 years ago?
No, not at all. Which makes it even more special for me. And hopefully there's still a few more to come yet.
Definitely. And what's it like working under Ed Joyce? How's that been?
Yeah, he's brilliant. He has so much knowledge, and is just so willing. Like, you see him in his element there when we're in the nets, and he's able to give feedback and stuff like that. And so to be able to learn from him, who also understands Irish conditions very well, is fantastic and something I'm really enjoying.
And what can we expect to see? Who should we have our eyes on from an Ireland perspective for this series? Because I think a lot of our audience won't know a lot of the Ireland team. Who are the young players coming through who we can expect great things from in this series?
Without putting too much pressure on them, I think our spin duo in Amy Maguire and Freya Sargent will be two to keep an eye out for with ball in hand. They were superb in the Sri Lanka series. They bowled in pressure situations and did really well. And then I guess with bat in hand, it's hard to look past the top three and Gabby Lewis and Ola Prendergast. I think they've shown their exceptional talent in the previous series. And I'd love to see more of that.
And the England squad, obviously, they're without a lot of the players who are going to the T20 World Cup they're probably going out there right now. Obviously, you back yourself to win in any scenario, but does that present a good opportunity for you guys to potentially get another series win out of it with a lot of the regular players out of the squad?
Oh, look, I think we're going to go into any series wanting to win. I don't think we can get complacent or anything like that. I still think the team that they're sending over, they're top class players. We've seen their performances across the domestic competitions in England. So I don't think we can get complacent or anything like that. I think as long as we stick to our strengths and are clear on our plans, then we'll give ourselves the best opportunity to be in that winning position.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, best of luck for the series. It starts on Saturday, and catch up with you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bit of news around the 2025 domestic structure dropped yesterday. The competitions will basically be aligned with the men's white ball competitions, the Vitality Blast and the Metrobank One Day Cup. The other thing they finalised were the names of the 8 teams. So we have, and spot the odd one out, Durham, Essex, Hampshire, Lancashire, Somerset, Surrey, Warwickshire, and the Blaze. Katya, talk us through that one.
Well, I think it's a bit of a weird one because when you stick out as much as that, it's quite weird. And clearly what the ECB's vision, or Beth Barrett-Wild's vision, has been is for the competition to be completely aligned with the men's. And the whole point of this was so that the counties could advertise under one banner and have that kind of fan base that gets behind Nottingham as not just or Nottinghamshire, not just as Nottinghamshire men's side, but also Nottinghamshire women's side. And I can imagine England are not best pleased that the Blaze have opted to keep their regional name. It also kind of, on the regional system that's now been completely scrapped, if you think about renaming the trophies with the T20 Blast and the Metrobank, it's still a remnant of the old system that's snuck through. I don't really understand the reasoning for it, apart from players feel a kind of alignment to the Blaze branding.
So yeah, I mean, the Blaze have been pretty successful in the last couple of years, and they think they've got a good thing going. Their skipper, Kirsty Gordon, in an interview with Cricket Her early in the summer, said, "We feel like we've created a bit of an identity with the Blaze. For now, we want to stay as the Blaze." It feels like there could have been a middle ground. They could have been the Notts Blaze.
Yeah.
And they probably still will be.
I kind of think they will end up as the Notts Blaze for next year, if not just for reasons of ease.
Can you imagine if all 8 teams were like, no, we really like our identity, and you just had all this chat and just have 8 identical teams?
There was at the beginning of the summer. I spoke to Charlotte Edwards at the beginning of the summer before we knew a lot about before we even knew, I think, what tier ones, or I spoke to her the day after the tier 1 teams were announced, and she said that she was hoping they could keep the Vipers as some part of their identity, because obviously they've been so successful as the Vipers, and that's clearly not happened. So there's either been a lot of negotiations, or it's just almost been a blanket hand down, and Blaze have just gone, absolutely not, we're not doing that kind of thing. So I don't really know.
And in fairness, I mean, obviously there is a slight comedy element to this. This is one of the costs of the restructures, that you have built up these brands to an extent, and now you're kind of putting them aside. But also, I think if you are going to do this, then you kind of have to actually do it, I guess. I guess the other way around is, could we talk to the people who run, I guess, Nottinghamshire County Council and ask if they want to rename their county the Blaze, and then it could be just
Robin Hood's Blaze.
Exactly,
Yeah, I guess from a player point of view, it must be incredibly frustrating if you're in your late 20s and you're having another domestic restructure. I can totally understand from a player's point of view, well, no, we've got a good thing going here. Let's keep the identity. But yeah, I mean, from a marketing point of view, you have 3 different names for teams that play at Trent Bridge. That's not great if you're trying to get new people in. Katya, the schedule for 2025 dropped last week. The headline news is that there is no test match in 2025 following no test match in 2024. You spoke to Heather Knight the other day, and in her typically diplomatic manner, she raised questions about the the suitability of the schedule.
Yeah, she was very diplomatic about it, actually, but you could kind of tell underneath there was a frustration that there were no test matches until 2026. In that announcement of the domestic schedule, they kind of tagged onto the end that there will be a Lord's test match against India in 2026, which is a big deal because there's never been a women's test match played at Lord's. And it almost felt like the ECB knew they were going to get questions about why there's no women's test match in 2025, having been no test match in 2024.
It's like, do you want the good news or do you want the bad news first?
Yeah, exactly. And they tagged onto the end to kind of preempt those questions. But Knight reiterated that she wants to play more test matches, and she's always, at every opportunity, said that she wants England to play more test matches. I think the caveat to it is that it's not always within the ECB's control. So they asked New Zealand this summer to play a test match and New Zealand said no. I think there was also, they asked the same thing for when they went to New Zealand this winter to play a test match there, and New Zealand said they didn't want to host a test match either. So I don't know whether they asked the West Indies or India whether they wanted to play a test match this summer and they said no. I don't know, but it is a shame when you look at the way the rest of the world is going with women's test cricket. South Africa will have played 3 tests this year by December when they play England, and England will have played none. Well, no, they will have played 1 against South Africa in December. India have played Australia, South Africa and England within the last 12 months. Australia have played South Africa, and it goes on and on. There are more women's tests being played by those big 3 nations, and you think if that is a trend that's going to start, and we don't know whether it's going to be a trend, but you'd want to jump on that curve and host more women's test matches. Also in 2023, we had that marquee 5-day test at Trent Bridge, which now feels like an isolated event rather than something that you can build on with success and properly market.
It doesn't feel like it's going away from feeling like an exhibition event.
No, not at all.
Because, I think for Test cricket to really thrive and get to where Knight wants it to go, you need to be playing it domestically. You need to be playing series outside of the Ashes, and that we're not actually seeing any movement on that, really. But there was that period where, how long was it? There was basically a decade where the only test matches that happened were the Ashes. Mm-hmm. We've taken a step, but we haven't got any further.
Yeah, it's a small step. And when you think as well, like, so I guess the other element of mitigation for the ECB is that test next year is against India. And India are one of the 2 teams touring in 2025. So, the test in 2026 against India. India on 2 teams touring in 2025. So I can see why they thought, we can't try and arrange 2 tests against India back to back. And it had to be either India or Australia to justify a Lord's test in particular. But also, like, we've seen them sort of pull South Africa out of test sort of hibernation. Like, and we don't know actually if that conversation was had with maybe West Indies for next year, who are the other team touring, or if they had that conversation with Sri Lanka. And actually, if you're going to play Test cricket, and if you want it to grow, that means also expanding it beyond, I suppose, like the traditional, like, women's cricket powerhouses. And this year they offered it to New Zealand. You can question whether they're in that bracket, but it feels like that even if Test cricket does expand at the moment, it's only expanding between like those 3: Australia, India, England, and then a little bit of South Africa as well. Whereas actually, can there be a move to get tests played on most multi-format tours rather than just the one?
Throughout the cricket season, Metro Bank are supporting and celebrating potential and existing volunteers and coaches of girls cricket. Head to Metro Bank's Instagram and X channels to watch the stories of 3 cricket heroes as they're thanked by England players and the girls at their club.